Oh, hello, everyone. I was gonna say hold on, but like,
Oh, yeah, hold on. Okay, yes. It's like
welcome
stopping a freight
everyone.
train. Once you click the live button,
Welcome everyone to an honest look. I can't even say welcome, Rick,
why not?
because you're always, I mean, welcome.
Good afternoon, Fatí.
Good afternoon. I mean, you are the guest of honor today, after all, right?
Yes, thank you. Yes,
How was your week?
the week was the week was great. The week was just great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, listen, let's start by I don't think you need an introduction. All I'm going to say, for those that don't know, is that Rick is a principle based coach and he's been coaching for over 10 years now. And he has a pretty interesting story that he's going to share about his life, what got into coaching, all the multiple different careers that he has held. I think the most recent one was a paramedic, right? Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Right. So we'll get into all of that. I didn't feel that it would be, necessary for me to introduce you like I introduce every other guest, because you're just going to introduce yourself as you tell us your story. But I do want to speak to the fact that the reason why we're doing this is because we realize that we've been bringing on so many incredible guests and really presenting their stories of transformation and what they're doing and what has taken them where they are, and what has created the transformations that that they have experienced. But we never really talked about ourselves. We never
No.
really presented ourselves in that sense. And in my experience, and I'm sure in yours as well, most coaches get to this career through something that they have overcome in their lives. And those stories are really, really important and interesting. And, you can learn a lot from that. You
Yeah,
learn a lot.
definitely.
Right. So that's why we decided to do this. As the host of An Honest Look, we felt it was important to just have that out there for you to just know who we are. So welcome, Rick.
Here I am.
Let's get started.
Let's get the party started,
Let's
eh?
get the party started. So I would say let's just start by from the beginning, like we do with everybody else. If you want to get a little bit into where it all started, what led you to this point, we're all ears.
Okay, so that is many years. Um,
Okay, we
you
got
know, so
time.
yeah, no, we have time, and there's a lot of detail, and it's hard to. And obviously, I've been reflecting a little bit on this and wondering, which part of the detail is relevant and things like that. But I think what I was saying to you earlier, before we came on, was um, my story. Although there's a lot of unique details to it in that are personal to me, kind of a thing. I think I think if you listen, not to sort of get information as opposed to, oh, I never knew about that, I never knew about that, but get behind the story, get into the feeling of my story, you'll find your story too. And I think
Right.
that's one of the things I am always doing is being at service, right? So I'm always wanting to give people value for their time, and what better value than discovering yourself in other people's stories too,
Right.
because you can, you know, I always felt I appreciate the Me Too movement. I wish we had done the Me Too movement back when I was younger,
Right.
you know, because you felt like you were isolated, alone. Nobody ever taught you the things that are being taught today, or being exposed to some of the things today. I think today we're on a transformational revolution,
Right. Right.
and it seems to happen every so many years. There was a big one in the 70s. It just seemed like everybody was having these enlightenment experiences, and there was big shifts there, and then about 20 years later, there's the Eckhart Tolle, and so it's like, but with each shift, there seems to be an exponential explosion of it, like a nuclear fission experiment, right? Like you can't. I think at this point, it really seems, given everything that's going on, I hope it's unstoppable.
Right. Right.
And the community that I'm involved in has got so much outreach all over the world, and same with your coaching circle. That and the internet is helping.
Right. I mean, I would say, I know you said it, many years of stories, right? I mean, I am obviously younger than you, but even within my
Obviously.
well, you have 9 grandchildren.
Yes, I do.
Even within my years of life, that shift has happened, right? In the awareness that we all hold about what is acceptable, what is not, the conditioning that I'm assuming you're referring to, right? The ability
Absolutely.
to express certain things. So, I think that is certainly something that is been happening over many years, but it's been picked back up in more recent years, especially. I think COVID had a big hand in that.
Well, COVID did a number of good things. One, and I've brought this up at other episodes of ours, is that it helped us to realize what slowing down really means.
Right.
In our life.
Right.
And when I was, growing up, there was this urgency, this constant urgency to keep moving forward, to keep doing better, to keep climbing the ladder, keep, as if that had a whole lot of meaning to, and I'll get into that in a minute, but it also had sort of a bit of an adverse effect, although I still think it's a positive effect. It really got people to look at themselves and their life closely.
I mean, that can only be positive. It didn't feel good.
No, it was quite awkward, right? And people realized how much they appreciated connections, how much they missed people, a lot of different things, and of course, according to some studies, and depending on where you're looking, a lot of increased depression and suicide ideations also appeared.
Right.
And I'm sure the divorce rate also increased.
I can testify to that. I mean, mine didn't start then, but know many people who did. But I want to get into your story.
Okay.
Let's get into the background. Like, where did you come from? You grew up in where you live now? Is that where?
No. I grew up in central Canada, Winnipeg.
Okay.
Commonly referred to as Winter Peg, because we have very long winters there. Although it's on the southern end of the province, it does get cold there. I mean, it's 40 below is no exaggeration half the time.
Right.
So, but I grew up there in the 50s and 60s, and in that time period, it was considered kind of a normal life, in the sense of a lot of things, a lot of concepts of how to raise children were quite common, right? My parents had the sort of took on the reward and punishment path,
Right.
and a lot of parents did. And I want to caveat a lot of this. Like, it's not to say anything was bad or wrong in what they were doing, because later on, I did realize that we're all doing the best we can with whatever tools and information we have at the moment, right? So it looked very real to them that this was the best way to raise kids.
Right.
And I often say my parents had two families, me and my brother, and then 10 years later, my folks had my two sisters,
Mm.
and we were almost literally generational apart from each other. And I noticed that whatever lessons they learned between me and my brother, they were doing a lot of things differently, right?
Right. Makes sense, right? As a
Yeah,
parent.
well, of course you learn from that, right? But here's the twisted thing about how our minds work, because part of our conditioning and the fault of our system is we make up meaning behind what we're looking at, what we're seeing. We're making meaning around either confirming what we believe to be true, or we're forming more new beliefs out of it.
Right.
So when I saw my parents giving a lot of leniency to my sisters, it was sort of like a personal attack on me. It was sort of
Right.
like, well, why didn't you do that to me? Why are you being so late? Why aren't you doing the same things? Not connecting that there was a mind shift in them, but only saw it from my own context that I was creating.
Of a 10, 15-year-old, I'm sure.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely, right. And it's not that I had a troubling childhood in the sense of, I don't know. I mean, even today, people would go so far as to say, well, it sounded like a very abusive childhood. And at the time, before my understanding, I felt it was that way,
Right.
both psychologically and physically.
Right.
And I created this context of that I could never be enough, no matter what.
Mm. Right.
And so having that context and belief to play with, even at that age, really dictated how I was going to act.
Right.
And it almost seemed, and this is just a reflect, it just almost seemed that the only attention that I ever got was when I was doing something bad.
Mm. Interesting, right?
Right. I mean, that's what I noticed, right? I noticed that I was getting more attention. And anyways, and so I did a lot of considered bad things, whatever. And some of them, you might say, well, how could that be bad? Well, it just happened to be bad.
Right.
But I knew that was one way of getting my folks to pay attention to me.
Right.
Because the other way wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it didn't matter what grades I got or what I brought or what kind of artwork I was producing. There was always something that could have been done better.
Right.
And of
Right.
course, then we play the game of comparison,
Right.
and as a young kid, when you're always compared to somebody else that seems to be doing better than you, why can't you be more like that, right? And so we create, and this is, of course, this is me with some of the understanding and the training, as an adult, started to realize, oh, this is what I was doing.
Right.
Like, this really wasn't my parents' doing. This was me at a very young age making up concepts and beliefs about my world, and then making up choices around how am I going to respond to this world that I'm seeing.
Right.
And we all crave love and connection. I think that's, you know we all want to be felt safe, and we all want to feel supported. In my twisted mind, I took action that I felt was necessary for me to feel those three things.
Right.
And yeah, and some of it wasn't smart.
Well, do you mind telling us some of these non-smart behaviors?
Well,
Let's, let's
one of
get
the
to
non
the meat of it.
well one of the non-smart behaviors was I took up a habit of lying.
Mm.
Like, I would never tell the truth in fear of the truth not being good enough.
Wow.
And so I would embellish and storytell and lie. And let me tell you, lying is a whole lot of work. First of all, you got to remember what lie you told, right? And who did you tell that lie to? And you know, and mostly it was to my parents, obviously, but it was so interesting to see that happen and then pay the consequences, because no lie ever turned out great.
Right. Well, that's not surprising, right?
I got caught in every single lie I had, and so, but it was refreshing later on. It was actually a huge weight taken off me in my 20s, that I didn't have to lie anymore. That I could be more of me could show up, and guess what? People would still like me. Like, holy shit, what a revelation!
But how did you get to that understanding?
Well, we'll skip forward, which is fine. And we don't have to get into the other thing. Well, I'll say one thing. Yeah, I'll say a couple of things. Like, you talked about some of my bad habits. I took up drinking and smoking and some other stuff quite early in my life. I was exposed to a lot of that stuff when I was 13, and I don't say I would never say that I had a really a habit or an addiction out of it, because I dropped it quite quickly, but it was consistent. Let me just put it that way.
Right. I could argue that to some degree we've all been there as 13-year-olds.
Well, yeah, and 13 and 14 and 15 and 16, and so one of the things that was really transformational for me. So a couple of things. Talk about the patterns, okay? One of the patterns that occurred in my life consistently was my parents moved a lot.
Okay.
I went to I think about 10 different schools. We moved about every 2 years. My dad would build houses and then renovate them, and then we'd sell them and move, kind of a thing. And then of course we also went from, like, we had junior highs, elementaries, and senior high and college and things like that. So it seemed like I didn't have any friends. I didn't have any long-term friends. So I was always the new kid. I was always the one that, welcome everybody. Here is, sort of like, as much as I wanted to keep hiding, I was always brought attention to.
Right.
And part of that attention was, of course, done by myself, because one of the things I fondly remember was that I guess I was quite disruptive in class. And
so interesting to hear you say.
Well,
me to picture you as a troublemaker.
I know. I mean, somebody that maybe really know me really well might know that. But when I grew up, like in my elementary, I never sat with the group. I was so, I guess, a troublemaker that they put my desk. Well, I stood in the corner so often that they moved my desk there.
Oh my God! You know what? I have a similar story too. It's so interesting.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if you listen, you'll find yourself somewhere in this, right?
Right.
And that's why I say about the Me Too movement, in the sense of you can listen to me and go, me too, right? Me too. I hear that, right? And but one of the things about I learned to be an introvert, and I believe that it was part of my conditioning, and one of the things that I came up with was, if I wanted to get out into the community of the students, I had to get away from the corner. And the only way to get away from the corner is to keep my mouth shut. And so,
wow, interesting.
right? So I had to learn how to be quiet and be still, no matter how many funny thoughts were going through my head at the time when I heard things. So I learned how to filter. I learned how to, keep my mouth shut. I learned how to be a good person. I started to learn how to please others so that I get along with the world, right? But here's the first inkling that things could be different for me. And I can't remember if it was grade 2 or grade 3. So one of the things is, during those years you had show and tell. At least I think it was show and tell, because you bring something, you get it in front of the class, and you present something.
Right.
And I remember very clearly this one time I was doing it. I was called up to the front. I was supposed to prepare for something, and I never brought the object. But the teacher said, "It's your turn." And so I'm up in the front, and I proceed to entertain the kids. And the kids are all laughing and doing all this at that, right? And I don't know what the teacher saw, and whether she was noticing that maybe I was hearing them laughing at me instead of laughing with me, kind of a thing. I'm not sure, but she called me after class, because I guess shortly anyways, and said, "Do you know what happened there?" And I don't remember the exact dialogue other than all from her side, but she said to me, "You have a gift." And I couldn't understand it at that point in time, what she was pointing to, until later in my adulthood. And it was around public speaking and having my voice heard. And here's the other little, what I call a spiritual moment. Her name was Mrs. Starr.
Oh. You really saw something in you, huh?
So, yeah, and I remember I could not do enough for this lady. Like, I would go after, like, we had the chalk brushes, and we had the room monitor, and I always volunteered to do it because it made me stay a little later, and I could do all the chores around there. Like, I obviously loved this lady. And not sure whether it was after that conversation or before that conversation, but anyways, I took a liking to her. And but from that, things kind of changed. We started moving around and doing different things, and got into a little bit of trouble, got into the wrong side of the tracks, so to speak. And
define that. Don't glaze over that. What's the trouble? I want to know. Rick is a
well,
trouble.
I mean, it wasn't really like I didn't get into, I didn't, the law didn't get a hold of me or anything like that. I think I was blessed in some ways. I kind of skirted a lot of the really bad things, but I to control my habit, if you want to call it that, like, I got into stealing and lying, and it was the only way to make money, in those days. I did get a job when I was 14, 15. I started to work. But on weekends, it was, we partied and played. We all played instruments. We had a garage band going, and a friend of mine, their parents sort of supported that behavior, so it was a great place to hang out all the time. Hung around pool halls, and there's nothing wrong with pool halls. Taught me how to play pool really good and swear really good, and but that's my past, right? These are just details about my past, and what I learned later on is although my past at that time given my understanding and given my thinking of the time, it was really defining who I was.
Right.
Right. Um, funny sidebar. I had, because I was in a band and things like that, I thought, it'd be great to write music. And so I got a book, and the book was How to Be a Rock and Roll Songwriter. Well, you got to start someplace, right? So I remember opening up the book and reading it, and it basically said, here are some of the criteria that you need to be a good songwriter. You basically have to have a real shitty life. You have to have something to write about.
Right.
Well, at
Makes
that point in
sense.
time, I really never considered my life. My home life was kind of like on a rocky road, but everything else was really good. Like I thought it was all
Yeah.
good, right?
Right.
Having fun, you know, lots of laughs, all that other kind of stuff. And then one day I came home, and my folks said, we're moving, which was no surprise, but we're moving across the country.
Mm.
Now, prior to that, and I knew that I couldn't, for some reason, I knew that I couldn't keep up with what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I welcomed the change, even though it was right in my kind of my graduation year and things like that. And I had built up some friends and really felt connected there. They were going to take me away from that. But as much as I kind of resisted it, I also welcomed it because
Mm.
it looked like a new beginning. I could sort of shed everything that I was in Winnipeg and reinvent myself in British Columbia. And so we moved to the furthest west coast that you could get. So I live on Vancouver Island right now,
Right.
and we moved there in the early '70s. So and haven't really moved around since. Um, but and that's what I did when I moved across the country. I literally consciously reinvented myself, and and didn't do any of the things that I was doing. Like I not that I was, looking for it or anything like that, but it just dropped away. Even the drinking dropped away. Like I just felt like I didn't need to do that anymore.
Right.
Like even when my friends were drinking, I would, I'd still have a one or two drinks, but I would never go overboard. I just found that interesting. Like it just had no attraction anymore. No, or traction. um, and it stuck, and that's what, and it stuck. So I was blessed to do that. But there was and like we talk about sometimes, like things that don't get resolved do have a habit of creeping back into your life, regardless of what circumstances you changed. And moving was a big circumstance, right? I mean, it was like a big, move. And yes, I had an opportunity to reinvent myself, but then the insecurity started to show up again, and the I'm not
Mm.
good enough started to show up again, and I would strive harder and do things and do more, and joined everything that I could ever think of, thinking that I would find my answers and salvation in just being busy.
Mm.
And and um, and then got into the real good habit of pleasing people so I could fit into groups and get along, and various things, which is also very taxing and busy. Um, but yeah, no, it's fascinating to sort of kind of reflect on the patterns, built from contexts that were created or beliefs that were created quite early in your life, and how transitionally they just follow you wherever you go. And
Right.
until you actually do something inside out, because everything up to that point in my 20s was outside in.
Right.
If I did this, if I got this car, if I got this right relationship, if I got all this kind of stuff, then I could feel better.
Right.
And as much as, having well, I never did have a real fancy car. My first car was a 1959 Vauxhall. So it's like a little square box of a tank kind of a thing. But anyways, but just to have that, right? Yes, it felt good in the moment to have this particular freedom, but it went away. It just sort of like, oh, I got a car now. Oh, big deal. But I kept looking for those other things, so if I take this right course in school, if I belong to the right organization in school, somehow I would feel better. I'm going to skip a few years ahead because there's really just a repeat of everything. But I was working for my parents, and I was between work, and a lady came in, and I didn't know that my mom was having a conversation with her. And anyways, my mom calls me in and says, I think you need to do this course. And I'm going, okay, it'll help you. And so again, that was another affirmation to me, sort of like, okay, there's something wrong with me.
Something is wrong with you. You got to fix it.
My mother has to fix it. And this is the course to take, or this workshop. And I said, well, I'm not going to go unless you sort of, like, they had this introduction meeting kind of a thing. And I said, I'm going unless you go, kind of a thing. And me and my mom had a real back and forth relationship on who needed more help. And I love her. But anyway, she goes to this thing, and we both see value in the workshop. Like, we meet the people there, and it's a bit of a strange, exposure. Like, these people that are sort of talking to us all have these like pasted, or they look like pasted smiles on their faces, and everything is so good. And I'm going like, what cult did we fall into, kind of thing. And because I never saw people happy. I like, as far as my concern, the world was quite miserable. Like,
So happy people look like a cult to you. It makes sense. It's
absolutely. Or get very suspicious about people that are far too happy. Right?
How interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, like how the mind creates meaning around things is just incredible and funny, like when you reflect back at it. But
right.
Anyways, we get out of that night, and the recruiter, was saying, do you see value in it? And I said, yeah, no, I can see that. Like, I'm kind of, intrigued by all these smiling faces and all this other stuff. Like, is this for real? And she says, yeah, it's real. It's and but it was darn expensive. Like, in those days, like, it's like, holy crap, it's like, where am I going to come up with this money? And anyways, they were trying to get me and my mom to do it. And my mom's pretty progressive like that. Like, she's actually, has been a seeker for a long time. I didn't realize how much of a seeker she was. I read a lot of stuff and books. She had self-help and potential, Think and Grow Rich. I think she had 4 copies of The Secret, kind of a thing. It's like all this stuff, right? But anyway, she said, I'm not doing it. I said, well, I think there'd be some value in it. I said, no, I'm not doing it, but you should do it.
Okay.
And right. So it's like, anyways, after the argument settled, in defiant, I said, fine, I'll do it, and I'll prove you wrong, or whatever. But it was life-changing. Like, it was like, even from the moment you signed up into this course, you were in the course. Like, the sign-up process was, you started the course, because they gave you a questionnaire, And one of the questions was, what in your life you really wanted to change, and be honest as you can. And
smile.
So, what's that?
And smile too.
Oh, and a smile too. Yes, I want more smiles. But anyways, I wrote a lot of things down, and then they have a little bit of an interview afterwards, prior to the workshop, and so they're very clear on what you're very clear about, what you want to get out of it. Because it wasn't a workshop about how-to techniques, which is what I was going to, right? And so, anyways, it was, and Dawn's on the line there.
Hi, Dawn.
Yeah, hi Dawn. I think I know Dawn. It was the EST course, EST. It was called the Form back in those days. Today it's called Landmark.
Okay.
So it's the work of Werner Erhard. And after I took the Form, and I'll just call it what it is, the Form. It really, like, I woke up. It was a 4-day course, and I woke up after the second day, I think, about 2:00 in the morning, and I didn't recognize my hand.
Your hand?
Yeah, I'm looking at my hand, wondering whose hand it was.
Wow.
Like, there was such a disconnect.
Mm.
And I really had this experience of what no thought was.
Wow.
Like seeing things literally fresh and new.
Mm.
And part of what that Form exposed was this thing called rackets or patterns. The behaviors that habitual behaviors that you picked up over the years, and then how you made those up. And so you had a really deep understanding of what was really created by you, not by the circumstances, but by your imagination and what meaning you were putting on those circumstances.
Right.
So everything was being painted with that similar brush. And so as I carried on in life in those early stages, it just made so much sense that, yeah, I consistently look for evidence around I'm not good enough. So everywhere I looked, it was just evidence. So I just spent most of my life supporting I'm not good enough. The world's unfair. Things are a constant struggle. All these different things. And of course, then I operated and took action all according to those beliefs. So the course really exposed that in a really controversial way in those days, because it was very experiential.
Right.
But in reflection, it's probably, although it's apparently is a lot more tamer, but it's almost as they almost basically stripped you naked in front of everybody, and then you got very comfortable about being naked. And then you took that experience back into the world.
Right.
And one of the promises in the Form was your circumstances would all change.
Mm.
And they did. They stayed the same in the sense of what they were, but the experiences I was having of them shifted. Totally shifted. And I started to see that we were really living in a thought created world.
Right.
And one of Erhard's quotes is, it's thought all the way up and it's thought all the way down. And it literally was life changing. Now here I am, married. I've got 2 kids, or 1 kid for sure.
In your 20s?
Yeah, I'm in my 20s. It's 1980s, early 1980s. And actually, I have 2 kids by then, just in case the second one's listening. So you forgot about me. No, I didn't forget about you. Um, but the but from then on, the world started to shift. The world started to look different. I didn't see myself as a victim to the circumstances anymore. And so I started to be more empowered to really take on things. Like my profession, the things I was doing within that environment was was literally mind blowing. Like I lost inhibition. I lost the fear to move forward. I didn't. I let go of being an introvert as an act, you know, um, and started to take bold steps. I fell in love with my wife again, and everything that was going along there. Um, and I'll be frank. When I first got married, because I was never good enough, I was always looking for an escape, right? So like, how can you have a relationship in that way? Always trying to escape. It's like,
You're doing the best you could.
well, given the thinking.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that fell away, and so, yeah, I started taking, more risks. I would say things started to happen that wouldn't have happened. And this was way before The Secret, right?
Did
This
you
was,
call those synchronicities?
well, yeah. And I'm not even sure. Yeah. So my feelings around synchronicity, I can't pronounce it right. Dry mouth here. I'm talking a lot, but the, like everything is there already,
Right.
except thought gets in the way.
Right.
And when you release the thought, whatever that belief is, then you start to see the world as it really is. And through that, you start to notice things. And one of the things that I know that I ran as an experiment was I wanted to buy a house with no down payment because I heard people were doing that. And I go, well, why can't I do that? Post Rick would have said, there's no way I could do things like that. Like, I'm not good enough. Like, I would have to, what kind of person would I have to be that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, and after the form, it was sort of like, yeah, let's see if I could create.
Why not? Yeah, why not?
Exactly. Why not?
Experiment.
And so when you move forward in that kind of like, you're looking for what the next step is, and there's a process there about, not holding on to the result, not trying to predict the future,
Mm-hmm.
but just being in the moment, right? Just seeing what comes up, responding to what comes up, So there was a lot of things because, I was a very reactive person, like, and I'm not saying I'm perfect today. If you talk to anybody that's really close to me, you'll know that there are times I do get reactive. However, I notice it right away. And then I can go, okay, no, here's a better response. Anyways, you talk about circumstance or coincidences. I start flumming through the page. I have this idea I'm going to buy a house with no down payment, and all of a sudden I look and go, there's a bank repossession in the paper. I wonder. I get curious, and so I phone up and I say I want to have a look at this house, and the real estate says, wow, okay, great. Turns out I was the third person to look at the house. I was the first person to actually go in the house, because when you stepped into the house, particularly on a rainy day, which it rains a lot where I live, it's a 2-story house, but it was raining on the first floor. Everybody looked into it and they saw work. I walked in. I saw potential.
Right. I love that.
Yeah, right. It's the same house, but with a different mindset.
Right.
And that's the cool part about the subtle shift, because it really is just a subtle, it's just a thought change, right?
What you choose to focus on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And whatever you're focusing on will determine what your next actions and how you're going to view the rest of the world, kind of a thing. And so anyways, I put an offer on the house, a ridiculous offer. Two-thirds of whatever they were asking, 2/3. And the real estater said, there's no way I could put this offer in. I'm too embarrassed to put this offer in because it's so low. And I said, I'm sorry, that's what I'm going to pay. And so in the context, okay, and these are ridiculous numbers in today's world, right? So they were asking 75,000 for this house. Okay, I offered them 25.
Oh, so it was 1/3 of what they were asking.
Yes, yeah.
2/3 less. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I said no. I said that's what I think it's worth. He says, and he argues with me. He says, I'm embarrassed to take it forward. And I says, well, that's your job. I said, what's the worst that can happen? They can say no.
Right.
Well, the best that could happen was they countered.
Mm-hmm.
So I offered from 75, I offered 25. They countered at 29.
That was their count. Wow.
They wanted to get rid of it because it was a house that was, unless somebody got in there, it was going to fall apart.
Right.
It needed a bunch of things.
Right.
So anyways, I go to the bank to get the deal of the mortgage again. I want this for no down payment. And I said to them, I says, look, I have the down payment, but, and this was a big but, it needs this, it needs this, it needs this. I don't have that. Would you consider me taking my down payment and putting it into the renovations of the house? I'll put in a new roof, carpeting, clean it, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know what how the negotiations went, but the bottom line was they said, we will give you a grace period of 30 days. So you have 30 days to make the home occupiable.
Wow.
And so my wife, the family, uncles, in-laws, my parents, we went to work for 30 days putting this house together. My dad's driving along. He sees these contractors hauling carpet out of this business. He drives up to them and says, "What are you doing with that carpet?" And he says, "Oh, we're just going to take it to the dump." Load it into my truck, right? So I had this industrial grade. There was nothing wrong with it. The business wanted to change the color or whatever, something. There was really nothing wrong with it. So I had this wall-to-wall carpet of industrial grade carpeting, like low pile. But anyways, like little things like that happen. And at the end of the 30 days, the house was reappraised, and then I got a mortgage 100% for the appraised value. And at that time it was like close to 85, 90,000.
Wow.
And so they said, well, I only wanted 29. So they gave, there it went, right? No down payment. So, I mean, when you get out of your way of thinking, literally for me, miracles have always happened.
Right.
And has life always changed? Like in some ways, if I was to reflect back, I would say there was a lot of places that life was a struggle. I raised 4 kids. I couldn't really hold a job very long. I got restless, and so we were never financially, but we always had enough, it seemed.
Right.
And I think there's something in that, like when we're not comparing where we are, comparing us to the Joneses, like the kids always got their clothes, they always got fed. There was always enough. There always seemed to be enough. And yeah, no, was it easy? No, life was never meant to be easy.
Right.
but the struggle to live went away. Like we had a lot of fun. Like we did a lot of things. Like people looked at us and they go, I can't believe all the things you guys do and stuff like that, you know. And the kids were always involved, and we went camping quite often. And yeah, we never had the best of equipment, but again, that wasn't the deal. The deal was to go camping. The deal was to have experiences. It wasn't to have the best of the best to have an experience. We wanted to have experiences, and then whatever showed up to help us along the way showed up to help us along the way. And
so I come in for a second and
go. Wow.
I love hearing all of this, right? But I know there's so much more. There's a lot more that I would like to hear you speak about. Specifically, I know that at some point you entered into a different field, into the, EMT. You became an EMT, and then there was your health condition, and all of the things surrounding those years. That I wonder if you can get a little bit more into that, right?
So one of the things that came up, and I'll be more brief on this one, but a lot of things I noticed, even reflecting, there's a concept called letting go.
Right.
And then something happens. And I found myself in a job that, I mean, it was paying well, bills were getting paid and things like that, but it wasn't fulfilling. And I was really getting caught up in it. And I wanted out. And I got to one point where it was so frustrating. I felt like I was going to do something really drastic. And I just kind of said, I almost laid out and just said, God, if this is what it has to be, just, just whatever, but I'm just about done. I'm just about done. And so anyways, I just kind of let that go. And very shortly after that, they had opened up the hiring process for the ambulance service, and it had been closed for years. Because I had gotten into it in a part-time work, and I loved it. And that in itself to me was a miracle, because these guys came into my office. I was running a business at the time, and they basically said, like, have you ever thought of being an ambulance attendant? And I go, no, I never thought about being a paramedic. And so they said, well, they kind of talked me into doing this, and it kind of looked attractive. The first time that I was on a training call, and the first time I was sort of allowed to run the call, and I sat down beside this elderly patient, and I reached over and I took a pulse. That act, something flowed through me that said, the feeling was just right. It just sort of like, this is where I need to be. This is where I want to be. And that was in 1985. And I never looked back after 1985 on that. Right. But my desire to do it in a bigger way didn't come till about 10 years later. And here I am with 4 young kids, still got a mortgage, but there was something that said, I just have to do it. I have to find a way of doing it.
Right.
And so I took, it's funny, like, again, when you point yourself in a particular direction and not overthink, okay, how am I going to do this? Your steps come in front of you. Like, you start to realize, and I came in contact with people that were giving me hints on how it was going to happen. So long story short, I ended up taking like a $10,000, and that, again, the money is all relative, but I took a significant pay cut to move to the mainland, kept my family on the island because I didn't want to move them, and bought myself a van and lived in the streets in my van to work at a job, at a career that I was really, really passionate about. And I, it it was interesting, but it was something I just felt comfortable doing, right? And I'd park it by railroad tracks, underneath bridges, by rivers, by wherever, back alleys. We didn't have Walmarts there, but like shopping centers and things like that. Like in between my shifts, and that's a whole book in itself. But I mean, you do what's necessary, right?
Right.
And again, it's part of my story, but it didn't really define me as who I was. I knew who I was at that time, and then throughout the career, I took some advancement, and later on in life, I got into the educational side of things, and but it was a career I looked forward to every day to get up and do. Like it was something. It had everything. I had the variety I required. It was interesting. Even the 12-hour shift sitting in a hospital with a patient was still interesting to me, right? Got to remember, I was a kid that spent most of his time in the corner of a schoolroom, so it was sort of like I could be quiet for a while. But then the organization took a big shift, and I found myself on the street. So they let me go, and I was not fitting into the square peg. I was a round hole for them. And so I found myself out and went into a bit of a depression because of, it was a job I looked forward to every day, right? So anyways, I took advantage of their counseling. I got some counseling, and I got a coach. And through that coaching relationship, I asked the guy, I said, like what kind of work do you actually do? I'm having a really good time with this thing, like what you're doing, and we're having a really great relationship. And so he said, well, if you're interested, here's some things, and here's what I also want you to do. I want you to go and find 10 other coaches in Canada, not locally, but elsewhere, and interview them and find out what the work is like. Right? So because every job's got a shit sandwich, right? And if you're willing to eat this, right? if you're willing to eat the stuff that's not really, in your flavor, then there might be something there for you. So I did that. Still was convinced that this was a way to go. The organization, before I left, because I was in the education department, afforded me to actually take the first level of ICF at the International Coaching Federation course. So I got some fundamentals of coaching through the organization. Then I got into other courses, behavioral science courses and things like that, which were really helpful. And so, when I saw a clearer path, so in other words, when I was in the depression, which really didn't last long because I knew enough that was not going to get me anywhere. And again, I took the training that I had done in the 80s as salvation, because that was the other thing. I considered myself thriving through that career. And the first thing I noticed when I got to the mainland, Vancouver, was that was not a shared experience. The experience was all over the map. There was all sorts of different types of experience. There were people that literally hated everything that they did in the ambulance service. There are people that, got burnout. We didn't have post-traumatic stress or that label at that time, right? It was a very macho organization. You toughed it up, like when could you clear for the next call? So you kind of learn to compartmentalize and not go into your feelings and all these other coping mechanisms. And you learned how to party hardy and as part of that strategy, right? So it was interesting. But because I loved that career so much, when I found myself outside of it and into a coaching world, I wanted to give back. I wanted something to give back to that. But there was a missing ingredient that I didn't know was missing. So I went on I did, because I went on a seek finding mission. I wanted to learn more about coaching. I wanted to learn what other modalities were out there. So I looked at NLP, neuro linguistic programming, which is very popular. I looked at cognitive behavior therapy and EFT and various other ones. Like, I really started to study these, studied well with the NLP world. I could see a lot of things out of NLP that really matched up with what the forum was talking about, in my earlier workshop.
It's everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, it's everywhere, right?
Everything, yeah.
Yeah. But it wasn't until I got into the work of Michael Neill, and right before Michael Neill, I had put together a workshop that I started to present to a few ambulance services across Canada, but again, I was looking for more material. I came across Michael Neill stuff, and the beginning of Michael Neill's TED Talk was a lot of the slides that I was using in my presentations, and I'm going, like, okay, like, what's going on here? It's like I didn't even know anything about him. Anyways, he was dropping names that I started to do more research on, like Sid Banks, who's the Scottish mystic that sort of used to live on Salt Spring, which is just kitty corner to where I live right now, who wrote a book called The Missing Link. And that was one of the things they recommended to read. And so when I read it and then got into Michael Neill's work and got him to actually, do some of the coaching and mentoring, it literally was a missing link that I was missing, like the spiritual aspect of things. And so I got really more into the three principles in combining with everything that I learned from the forum and through behavioral science and NLP, and that became not my package, but obviously my skill set.
Right.
Because I'm a firm believer in part of the three principles in any coaching environment, actually, is that no coach should ever have an agenda for its client.
Right.
And because it's all client driven. And that was one of the things that wasn't really taught to me in the beginning. Like, I didn't, they gave me a bunch of questions and various other things and how to direct the client and stuff like that. So this was a bit of a 180 twist. But it felt more comfortable because there was less preparing that I needed to do.
Right.
All I needed to do was really show up, be who I am, and listen. And there's other aspects to that, but respond to the moment,
right.
And trust the process. So yeah, I mean, in full circle,
Let me ask you something, because I feel like we skipped something important here, right? Because I know you and I know some of your story. I want to know how all of this skill set that you have helped you through some really difficult.
Well, absolutely.
moments,
Right? That came in my mind just as you were just about to say that, because
detail there.
Well, a little detail, but one thing, I'll tell the audience, Fatí and I have known each other. We've never met officially, but we've known each other for over almost 2 years.
Right.
And we've gotten to the point where we're almost finishing our sentences, or we're thinking each other's thoughts, which is scary. But again, like I did what I had known, the understanding I got back in the 80s as getting me through all the crappy work, like all the trauma in the ambulance service. I didn't realize, and at that point, it was everybody else's trauma.
Right.
When I left and lost my job or got let go or how fired, whatever you want to call it, that was trauma to me.
Right.
And it was so it was coming back to me, and that was new. right? I hadn't experienced trauma to me since I was a teenage kid, right? Because I, having that understanding in my late 20s, there's 40 years of pretty pretty good life. I'm not going to say anything bad about it, but then all of a sudden it's like, oh, back at me. So a lot of other crap and things came up. That's where the depression started to happen. And just as I was sort of going over that, and I thought I had a plan going forward, I get a diagnosis of cancer.
Right. Right.
Okay. All
Right.
right. And that's a bit of a drop and a bit of a shell shock to the system, because all of a sudden now your mortality is at stake. It's like, okay.
That's not a, that's not
Yeah.
a, right.
Right. And then it's like, okay, so fine. I kind of get past that a little bit, although you can't quite get past it because it's lingering.
Right.
And then my I think it was like both my parents got sick, and the blessing of not having any work created the space and time for me to look after them. And so I also found myself back in the role of caregiver.
Mm.
And again, not like, okay, well, I guess I'm retired now or whatever. No, I'm too young to do this. I need to do some work. No, 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 you have to deal with cancer. Okay, I'll deal with cancer. No, no, no. Now you like, it just seemed, and this might sound harsh, my life does not belong to me.
Right. Right.
It's like, what the hell's going on here? My dad gets better. My mom doesn't quite recover. And she comes home for a brief time, long enough for me and my wife to because my dad's was quite active at that time, so it was enough time for me and my wife to take a trip across Canada that we've always wanted to do, and so we did, and this was all before my surgery, because my surgery was scheduled just after my birthday, actually, and so we had time to do that, because we had no idea after the surgery what life was going to be like, because it was a healing process that takes months and other things. So we thought, let's just get this over and done with. We got back, got my surgery done. Everything went really well in that direction. And then my mom took a turn, and I was back in the role of caregiver. And then shortly after that, she passed away. And then it was now looking after my dad. And then COVID hit. And these are all recovery. Yeah. And,
Right.
and all this. So all this circumstances, like from an outsider, it would be reasonable for somebody to go, okay, I can understand you can be, how you can be pissed off, how you can be like, oh, woe is me, or this is unfair, of like, that's a lot of stuff going on in your mind, right? And while those things did cross my mind periodically, they didn't stick.
That's like, I'm gonna stop you for a second, because that to me is what's remarkable. Just hearing you talk and the way you talk about it, right? These are pretty significant things that have happened in your life, and just the way you're recounting them is that more. It's like telling what was, without like really getting into the story of it, or like, I'm sure there were some stories, and I'm sure there was some thinking around that, right?
Well,
I mean, you couldn't be human if you did.
Yeah, absolutely. There is those natural tendencies, right, to build a story around them. But you see, I gave up lying and storytelling. Right? Like, I knew that whatever story I was going to believe, that would become my life. And so if I saw everything that was going on to me, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect, that this doesn't come up once in a while. if I saw all this circumstances, the loss of the job, the cancer, looking at my parents, COVID, all this kind of stuff, as meaning that my life was unfair, that it was just another defining moment to prove that I didn't deserve anything, right? That's an easy path for people to go down.
Right.
And I know many people, many clients that have taken those paths. But thought is a paintbrush. And this is what I love about Sid Banks's work, is that, one of his quotes is, thought's a paintbrush, and we can paint thought on anything. And that's what life's going to look like. Now, I'm not saying this is making things into a happy place, or always having rose-colored glasses on, or even a spiritual bypass, or positive toxicity, as we
Positive.
yeah, positive toxicity, or whatever it was. I screw it up, but it's an understanding that, yes, those things happened, but the suffering and the anguish are all optional. Like, I don't have to, like, they're all energy that serves no purpose in healing. And so when I recognize that my feelings are dropping, because one of my lines is that our feelings are the barometer of the kind of thinking that we're doing. So if I'm feeling low and depressed, I'm obviously having depressive thoughts, regardless of what's going on in front of me. And this is, from the form, when the thought shifts, the circumstances shift. Yes, it was cancer, but it wasn't cancer with a death sentence. It was cancer with a possibility.
Right.
When I lost my job, it wasn't a death sentence in that, like, it was, well, there's a new world. Right? And it's not a positive spin on it, because I didn't intentionally put those spins on it. Like with positive thinking, it's sort of like, oh, here's a negative thought, I'm going to cover it full of positive thoughts now and somehow make it away. No, it's letting go of my position that there's something wrong with this, or that I'm holding on to. Like, well, it just becomes an event. It just becomes an event. And so a lot of things where in the past it would have defined me, it was sort of like, okay, well, oh, well, it's like, okay, and we move forward, right? Because there's more to life, even in this physical sense, right?
You make it sound so simple, right? I feel like I'm speaking for, some of what people may think listening to this, right? You make it sound so simple, and yet, as someone who is doing a lot of work on herself, who tries to really focus her thinking on things that serve me rather than the things that keep me there, I know the amount of work and self-awareness that goes into being able to respond to life in this way, right? And I know you're a very humble person, but at the same time, I want to underline that, because you make it sound like very easy and simple, and I'm sure it is for you. And at the same time, I know that there was a process and a journey that you just spoke to, right, during this last hour, getting there, right, coming to really facing life the way that you do.
Well, it's all choice, right? And and part, it, in the sense, and this is where it kind of gets misinterpreted a lot. It does sound simple, and it is simple. The work itself isn't necessarily right there, right? And I know from clients and other practitioners, is the experience of that varies with an individual, right? So it's but the aspect of it is very simple. Like when we really truly understand that it's a thought created world, like it's an inside out. So my experiences are created from the inside out. It's not the circumstances that are dictating how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
It's me about the circumstances.
Right.
So when I see that and experience that, not from an intellectual aspect of it, but actually notice the shift. And here's a really brief example of this. And like I said, like you think I would be walking in bliss all the time with those painted smiles on the faces, like those people in the workshop, right?
The creepy people that were smiling.
No, those creepy people. But the fact is, life happens, right? So we're always in flow of life. You can't avoid life. There's stuff happens all over the place. Stuff that's really traumatic and god awful, and various, like nobody gets a fair break. Let me just put it that way. But what you do with those makes the fundamental difference. And one of the most powerful books I ever read was by Viktor Frankl. And I read this several years ago. But here's a guy in a concentration camp that's actually having not a bad time. Like how, and everyone goes, how can that be? How can that be, right? Because it's not the circumstance that tells you how you're going to live. You're going to tell yourself how you're going to live. And when you don't tolerate your bullshit, and right, it's sort of like your bullshit meter comes up quite quickly.
You don't feed the thinking, right?
No. And like, and wrapping this up. So my dad lives with us now, and every once in a while, thoughts about the past creep in, right? And yesterday, he's outside and he's doing his thing. I'm doing my thing. And then a creepy thought comes in, and it paints a picture, right? And I start feeling that I'm reacting to what I'm thinking when I'm painting, right? And this is from the work, if you want to call it the work, it becomes very easy for me now to notice where my thinking's taking me.
Right.
And I can forgive myself for creating a story around somebody that's very innocently acting according to his way of acting, right? But that's what we do as humans. We do this all the time. I just found out early in my life that wasn't necessarily true, that I didn't have to keep going down that road. I didn't have to try and change my parents. If I had better parents, I wouldn't be this way. If I didn't move so often, I would be this way. If I wasn't shoved in a corner at school, I wouldn't be this way. Like that's how my life was defined.
Right.
And I credit a lot of this to that original workshop, and then later on getting involved with Michael Neal's work and Sid Banks and the Three Principles coaching community around really focusing my attention on who I really am and where does my experiences really do come from. And then the circumstances just become circumstances.
Right. It's the way
right. And it's really how you show up. Absolutely. So.
Wow, Rick. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on, listening to you and your story, and like just connecting all the dots. It's been like it just flew by. I can't even believe an hour, 20 minutes. But I have to ask, like I ask every single time we have a guest. Do you have any last words or anything that you want to leave us with before we close the show?
It's a bit of a Buddha quote in there, or a philosophy. You can't go through life without pain. The struggle is optional.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, Sid Banks is quoted by, like it's a contact sport. We're going to, we're going to get our bruises. Like it's just part of life. Werner Erhard, his answer to that quote is, if you're walking in a rainstorm, you're bound to get wet. Kind of a thing. Right. So, I mean, like, I used to laugh. I used to work at a sawmill, and guys would get hired in the sawmill and they would complain about the sawdust. I used to, be a paramedic, and people would get hired on there, and they'd complain about the inter-hospital transfer calls, or they'd complain, like, it's the work. It's part of the work, right? So like you have to understand that you're in life and life is happening around you all the time. So,
and it's up to you how you respond to it.
Absolutely.
Well, I was going to put your contact info here in the chat, even though it's everywhere because it's our podcast. I'm still going to put it in here. What can I say? It's been an incredible hour. I love that we were able to tell your story. And I you too, believe it or not, I learned a lot of new things about you and what has taken you where you are today. So I wanted to thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
It was way overdue. And I may not be here in 2 weeks from now.
Why?
As we tell my story. I'm joking.
We're going to flip the tables around, yeah.
flip the tables around and do this again. But thank you so much for coming on and being vulnerable, sharing your story with us. I have no doubt so many people will have many Me Too moments listening to this episode. So
that's great. All right. Thank you very much.
Of course. You're very welcome.
Yeah. And reach out to both of us.
Reach out to both of us. And if you want to listen to this episode again, you can catch it on YouTube, on our podcast when it drops. And if you found value in it, please share it. Spread the love. Help us amplify our impact.
Yeah.
Thank you for following us. And we'll see you next Wednesday.
Yeah. And thanks, Don.
Everyone. Thanks, Don, for being here.
Yeah, you bet. Bye now.
Bye.